Well, there are many myths and misconceptions about the human brain, and today, in this video, I would like to talk about 3 of those misunderstandings or misconceptions. You've heard about all 3 of them already before, but the interesting thing here is well, there is a tiny bit of truth, a tiny small amount of truth in all of those 3. The first one, the first big misconception is you're only using 10% of the brain. Now, this misconception actually goes back all the way to the year 1900. No one less than, I have to now find his name, William James. He's considered to be the father of American psychology. He basically was quoted of saying, and I'm going to read this off here, "We're making use of only a small part of our mental and physical resources." Wow, yeah. That's basically what he said, is our human brain, we can do so much more and we're not actually using it to its full potential. He didn't even specifically refer to the brain here, but later on this was reduced to the statement, well, we humans only use 10% of our brain. Yeah, actually, the thing that he meant to say was actually quite something different. But then later on in 1930, the neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield, he did experiments and he was not able to stimulate all parts of the brain. He was not able to get a reaction back from all parts when he did some experiments. Then basically this was then also seen as evidence that only a small part of the brain actually is used. And then later on in the 1950s even, there were many self-help books and groups who basically says, well, you can unlock your hidden powers, right? If you're only using 10% of the brain, maybe 90% of the potential is still there, is not tapped. So essentially you see that how one statement by one scientist was kind of misinterpreted, and then a whole, maybe I could even say a whole industry started to appear here. And I think one of the reasons why these statements fell on such fruitful ground is because, of course, we humans would like to see it that, actually I can do so much more than what I'm able to do. I just haven't found my true abilities yet. But in reality, of course, we now know that all parts of the brain are used. However, not all parts are used at the same time. So essentially, of course, when you're maybe visualizing something, you're imagining something, and you're seeing something, of course, the visual part, the visual cortex, which is in the back of the brain, is more active. Other parts are less active. Yeah, but sooner or later, pretty much all parts of the brain will be used. So you see that, this was indeed a very big simplification. So let's move on to the second misconception. Yeah, the second misconception is that people can be divided into 2 groups. So you're either right-brained or left-brained. And if you're a right-brained person, then you're pretty good in arts. And if you're a left-brained person, arts and creativity maybe. Yeah. And if you're a left-brained person, then you're probably better in the sciences, in math, in logical thinking, right? So it's a very convenient one because if you know that you kind of belong to a right-brained person, yeah, if you're creative and in arts, it's perfectly okay not to be so good in, let's say, math or in logics and rational thinking, and vice versa. If you're good in, if you consider yourself to be a very left-brained person, very rational, logical thinking, it's okay if you're not so creative, right? Of course, this does not exist. People are not right or left-brained. It is, of course, correct that different parts of the brain are responsible for different tasks, but this myth actually goes back to the 1960s, where someone called, Roger Sperry, he did experiments with on so-called split brain people. So you have over here the corpus callosum, where the 2 brain hemispheres are connected, and people who had a surgery where this part here in between the 2 hemispheres is severed or split, the 2 brain hemispheres cannot communicate with each other anymore. And from this point onward, it was, some people thought, well, there are so-called right-brained or left-brained people, but actually, actually all parts are used. Obviously, it's only that the communication between those 2 parts is hampered, and actually not only just hampered, but actually blocked. This basically means that essentially, some people have a problem with one task and are not able to do another task because the 2 brain hemispheres cannot communicate with each other. But you see, again, this is a very convenient myth because it explains so many things. It gives you identity, right? I'm more a right-brain person, or I'm more a left-brain person, and then it's kind of perfectly okay if you're not successful in certain things, or if you're not able to do certain things as well as other people. And of course, we have natural preferences and tendencies and maybe even talents. Nobody questions that. But it's, I think, very dangerous to, if it becomes some form of an identity, then you don't even try to overcome your weaknesses. Yeah, if you consider yourself to be very left brain, very rational, yeah, of course, I cannot draw, I cannot be creative. I'm not even gonna try because I'm a left brain person, right? So you see what I mean? So you have to be careful that those myths do not become something like so-called self-fulfilling prophecies. Yeah, and the last myth is a bigger brain means more intelligence. That's a difficult one, actually. Of course not. It's not just brain size, but brain size can have an indirect impact as well. Of course, humans compared to other animals, for example, chimpanzees or orangutans, the great apes or monkeys, have proportionally a much larger brain. And indeed, the brain is one of the organs that consumes a lot of energy and also oxygen, yeah, more so than in other animals. So brain size does play a role. However, that's not the only thing, because intelligence, whatever that means, because people also don't fully agree what intelligence is, but intelligence depends on the number of nerve connections that you have. And a large brain does not automatically mean that you have a lot of nerve connections. So you see, there is indeed a misconception here as well. And interestingly, maybe larger animals with a larger body size have also a larger brain. Might be, but there are also animals like certain dinosaurs that were huge but had a tiny brain only, right? So you see, even in relation to the body size, it doesn't always doesn't work. But I think the big problem over here is that we're trying to now relate or correlate something like, for example, brain mass or brain size to something that is kind of difficult to measure and also difficult to define, which is basically intelligence. Of course, various measurements have been attempted over the past, in the past, but yeah, there is also a certain amount of disagreement on what intelligence actually is. But you see that these are essentially the three misconceptions, and I think the big take-home message is the following: that if we kind of allocate our abilities, or if we make our biology, let's say, responsible for our abilities, and certainly biological mechanisms do play a role, but if we make biology responsible for our abilities, well, then essentially there is no need to try to improve, right? What's the whole point of learning something new? Well, if my brain is not made for learning that new thing, right? Because I'm just happen to be a left-brained or right-brained person. Yeah? I'm sorry, I won't be able to understand a certain concept because my brain is too small. Who would say that, honestly, right? Well, so what's my take-home message here as well? Of course, it's a combination of both nature and nurture, to use some famous terms here. It's the inborn biology and, of course, also the environment that determines our personality and also our abilities. It's rarely either one or the other. I think we just have to be careful that we do not attribute our personalities or our abilities or our capabilities or inabilities just either to biology or to the environment. It's always a combination of both. I wish you the best. Bye-bye.